Well, here we are again, another night with the day winding down for me at the farm. Isn't it amazing how adept we all are at ignoring root causality in times of crisis? We blame everything but dealing with the roots of the problem. And then people take advantage of that and want to change everything, the systems, instead of dealing with the problems as they are. At a macro level, when this plays out, people want to change the world order. They want to change their forms of government. People will do anything and everything but deal with the problem. And the problem is human nature. Goes back to what I was talking about the last couple of nights. We keep trying to build a utopia, a perfect society, with things that are imperfect. Now, isn't it interesting that we know when something's not perfect, but yet when you really sit down and think about it, no one can actually say in this world they absolutely know what perfection is. Like I was saying last night, but we all are very, very good at pointing out the imperfections in others, aren't we? Be it individually, between people, between tribes and groups, between nations. But we really don't like looking at the imperfections and the insufficiencies in our own lives. Like I said, people are afraid. And why are they afraid? Well, there is the presence of fear. And fear is false evidence appearing real. There's also pride. People don't like to admit they're wrong. Because if they're wrong, then they also might have to admit that's not the only thing they're wrong about, including how they view you and one another. So, this is the great juxtaposition all of human history has incredibly well laid out an example for us in every generation to learn from. Yet in every generation we do the same things. We don't learn. We endeavor to ignore history, deny history, and erase history. And why do we do that? Pride and fear. Malice, covetousness, entitlement, bitterness, hatred. Those things are the malicious code in the human condition. And being that everything that we create as human beings with that susceptibility, that vulnerability, we pass on our own traits to everything that we construct. Hence why I say, trying to construct a perfect reality, a perfect utopia using imperfection. And like I said last night, how would you know if you had perfection? What would that look like to you? Well, I can tell you what it would look like to me, is that none of us would struggle with pride, with fear, with hatred. We would be perfectly content. We would be content. We would be in truth. There's a wonderful phrase in the Bible, and it says, perfect love casts out all fear. Now let's think about that for a second. Perfect love casts out all fear. Well, none of us can honestly, in all truth, say that we're perfect at love. We are imperfect in our loving of others, ourselves, but most importantly, God. So let's look at the phrase again. Perfect love casts out all fear. And what's fear? Right? Let me state it this way. Perfect love casts out all false evidence appearing real. That means it casts out lies. It breaks the chains of deception on your mind, your body, and your soul. That's pretty heavy when you think about it. Let me say it again. Perfect love casts out all false evidence appearing real, freeing you from the tyranny of that fear of that false evidence appearing real, which deceives you and enslaves you and devours you, leading you to your destruction. So, isn't it amazing that we're so adept, so great at ignoring root causality, the roots of the problem? You know, when you look at complex systems, particularly if you're trying to troubleshoot things, you have to go and look at it. You have to trace things down. And when you're trying to diagnose the problem, what you really are trying to do is you're trying to get to root causality. Because if you don't get to root causality, you're only dealing with the symptoms. You're never ever going to actually solve the problem. In fact, you're probably, in most cases, going to cause even more problems. Because the nature of complex systems is that they are complex. There's an interplay between each of the nodes, each of the components of those complex ecosystems, right, that have cascade effects on multiple other nodes in those complex systems. You want to see how this plays out? Look at some of the policies that have been put into place by governments. Right? In an attempt to solve the problem, they don't get to root causality and cause unintentionally cascade effects that exponentially create more problems, which exponentially increases the complexity of the situation they were trying to address. That's a trap. When you don't deal with the roots of the problem, and you don't diagnose what those roots are as the problem, you're left with the symptoms of that problem. And so, if you treat the symptoms of the problem, but never deal with the root causality, right? You may very well create destruction. And as that process goes, it's pride and fear that prevents people from changing course. Because they have a lot invested in it, particularly if we're talking from a governmental perspective, and a policy, or a set of policies, or a worldview, or an ideology, or any number of things where fear of it being exposed start to dominate those who fear the exposure. It either breaks them and humbles them and they take responsibility, or it deepens their fear and increases the strength of their pride and refusal to admit they were wrong. And in doing so, the two conspire together to create more cascades due to the actions and decisions these people take to make it exponentially worse, which is a cycle that amplifies all that came before it. That's why we say there's a way which seems right to people, right in their own eyes, but it is the broad path to destruction. It is their fear and pride that rules over them and causes them to try to cover themselves and their mistakes and or their crimes, their unethical behavior, whatever it is that's being used against them to keep them in fear and lock them down inside with their pride. And what is that? Well, that is fear is what? Right? That is what? False evidence appearing real. They are deceived. They are self-deceiving, and they deceive others. They are perpetuators of, slaves to, and proxies for the lie. And because they can't deal with that and accept that, they project that on everyone else. Because their pride won't allow them to admit they're in the wrong. So play this out in this way. As it is for people, so too it is for nations. Are you starting to understand why it is I always say that, and why I always refer back to only the truth in love can bring about authentic justice and mercy from humble and contrite hearts? If you don't have a humble and contrite heart, you're ruled by pride and you're ruled by fear. You're ruled by a lie. And that means you're deceived. So you try to paint everything in false light. You try to whitewash yourself while casting dispersions on others. Because of why? You're terrified you'll be found out, that somebody will see your insufficiencies, your foolishness, your avarice and hubris for what it is. You are addicted to your pride. You are ruled by fear. You are ruled by false evidence appearing real. And as it takes over you, what it does is it changes your brain. It takes over your thinking and it infects your soul. And it has impacts on your physical being. That is where confirmation bias in its extreme forms has its root causality. Because the longer you go on in a lie, the darker it becomes, and you can't see the consequences that it's causing to others because you're blinded by your pride. It's why we say, right? Pride comes before the fall. If you could see that fall inside of you, it would break you and humble you if there's any life inside of you. Otherwise, you have nothing but darkness inside of you, and that is pride, fear. And so when somebody or something shines a light on something and you get triggered, it's exposing something in you. And your reaction exposes you in that light. How you act, how you react, exposes what your root causality is. Now, why is this? Because those that are addicted to their pride and enslaved to the tyranny of fear, right? Enslaved to false evidence appearing real, are terrified of that being exposed, right? So they project onto others what they have done, are doing, and plan to do. They create the conditions for their own destruction because they refuse to take responsibility for their own actions. In Christian beliefs, those are components of what they call sin. People don't like the word sin. They get triggered by it. Do you know where the word comes from? The word sin comes from Ur of the Chaldees. Sin was the chief of the Babylonian pantheon, the king of the pantheon, the Babylonian version of Zeus, if you will. In their worldview. And sin was represented by the moon. which is an interesting concept when you think about that from a geopolitical and worldview standpoint in the days that we're in. Does the moon have any light of its own? Well, we've proven that it doesn't. It's a dead rock. So, why does it shine at night? Well, it reflects the light of the sun, but it has no light of its own. Where do you think the notion of putting something into false light comes from? How about this? Another biblical concept. Jesus said that Satan, Belial, right? The Nakash, meaning serpent or glistening one, the most cunning, clever, deceptive of all the beasts of the field, right? Beasts being tribes, tongues, nations, kingdoms, empires, powers, and principalities combined in a unified form in the external temporary, the temporal world, finite, right? That the Nakash, Satan, Belial, appears as or like an angel of light. Like is not the same as. There's not an equivalence there. It's not implied. It's not the original thing. It's like something else. But it doesn't mean that it's equivalent to something else that it's like. It is false light. That's why we use terminology like the light of the truth, right? And the counterfeit of that is things being put in false light, like the light of the moon, which was where the word sin came from. And how does that rule? Why do you think it is that so much evil, so many things that are negative happen in the dark? Why are so many people naturally afraid of darkness? What do you think that's trying to tell you? You're seeing something in the external that's trying to tell you something about the internal and the eternal reality. Something bigger than the temporal finite realm that you live in these mortal coils that we call our physical bodies. And why are people afraid? Again, if you're afraid, you have fear. And where does fear come from? False evidence appearing real. That's deception. That means it rules you with false evidence appearing real. It rules you with fear. Why do you think all tyrannies, all tyrannical, autocratic societies rule by fear? They project onto all the others, their own citizens, and upon the other nations, what they really are. They put themselves in the whitewash false light while projecting a different kind of false light on others. They project their own fear, pride, guilt on to others. We call that displacement or transference, right? The terms are different in some ways, but I'm just going to use them interchangeably here. And so what are they doing? Well, they're engaged in deception. And what is deception? Well, it's an intent to mislead, right? To deceive, right? Which is lies. And what is that? Well, it's false evidence appearing real. That's what a deception is. You see, the micros and the macros all have a proper context. They all tell a story. Everything here tells a story. It shows you things. The patterns in nature. The patterns in your own nature, your human nature. In the tribes, the tongues, the nations. In history. There's a depth to reality, a resolution of reality that is only able to be seen through the lens of truth. And the light within you exposing externally what is there, which was previously hidden in the darkness. And what was hidden in the darkness? False evidence appearing real. Now think about that. So if you're not willing to deal with root causality and the depth, look at the depth of things, right? You're only left with the shallows. What's observable just on the surface. And if you're basing things simply on appearances, on the shallows, you're easily deceived. Why do you think we use camouflage in the military? Why do you think things are often hidden and locked away? I think Winston Churchill said it. He said, you know, something along the lines of, truth is so important that it has to be hidden behind an entire bodyguard of lies. I'm sure I misquoted it, but you get the point. That's kind of like the moon eclipsing the sun, wouldn't you say? But yet, if all you see is the external reality and the judging of the outer appearances of things, and you're addicted to your pride, and you're a slave to fear, which is a lie, which is sin, then you're blind to what actually is going on, and what you actually see is co-opted by your worldview being inverted, being shallow, your perceptions being distorted, your thinking being corrupted. And you don't even realize how that impacts the decisions and actions that you take based upon that cognitive dissonance that is in your head. But yet others can see it and see through it. There's nothing that can be truly hidden. It's like being an X-ray machine. You don't see X-rays. You can measure them with instruments, but you can't see them with your naked eye. Yet those X-rays can show you what's inside of you. An MRI machine, right, gives you a peering into the body in a way that, like the X-ray, you can't see with your naked eye. The light of the truth exposes stuff like an X-ray. Like an MRI machine. And people that are in truth are like lights. They're like the light that you can't see, yet it exposes stuff. They may never tell you, but they do see. But if all you view things on is what your naked eyes see, your ears hear, you can touch, you can taste, you can smell, and you have a mind darkened because you are addicted to your pride and a slave to false evidence appearing real, your fear, you're in a very, very dark place. Yet you cannot understand that there's nowhere to hide. So you scheme, you create machinations, grand schemes to try to cover up things, to try to get away with it. Never understanding that when you are putting that and blaming others for it and putting it on them, you're exposing you. You're exposing what you've done, what you're doing, and what you plan to do. And that is a really, really bad strategy. In fact, you're so blind you cannot see that you're on a superhighway towards destruction. You won't even admit it, even if you do know. because of pride, which increases the fear because you know what? Everybody inside really knows. Everybody knows. There are no more excuses. Everyone knows. But it's your pride and your fear the lie that rules you, runs you. And I don't care if you run a nation, you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, whether you're a billionaire or a pauper. You all know. But you suppress the truth in your hearts because you're addicted to your pride and ruled by false evidence appearing real. You are in a lie, and you know it. And you expose yourself constantly, exponentially increasing the pressures on yourself. And as you do that, you increase the projection on others, exposing yourself faster, exponentially increasing the dire predicament that you are in, hastening your fall. How's that working for you? How is doing it your way because you love your lies, you love your darkness and the things done in darkness more than you love the light of the truth? How's that working for you? Because you're being crushed by it. It will lead you to your end. It is a war you cannot and will not win. Because you can't find enough temporary to defeat an eternal foe. Welcome to the valley. Welcome to the republic of the shadow of the real. Welcome to the valley of the shadow of death. Welcome to the valley of decision. You can always choose to face your fear, let go of your pride, and ask God to free you with the light of the truth. But what you're not going to do is you're not going to win this war. Because you're already defeated. You can't win a war when you show your foe everything you're going to do, have done, and are planning to do. That's how you get defeated. You see, the fear, the false evidence appearing real, tells you, I'm a liar. I'm the one that's wrong. There's no God. There's no truth. Truth is what you make it. It's all relative, right? You got plenty of science that you've tried to back it up with. Of course, you've corrupted that too. Well, that's more false evidence appearing real, and that's a lie. But if you want to go down with the ship that you torpedoed yourself, that's your choice. But you're not going to take the rest of it with you. But you are going to pay the consequences for everything that you've done here. And it has lasting eternal echoes. So, you can deny that all you like. That's your choice. God doesn't force people to do anything against their will. He gave them free will. And I'm not going to get into free will versus determinism here, other than to say that if you hold on to your pride and you don't admit you have a problem, which is the first step out of your prison, which, by the way, the door is open to. It's open. You will remain a slave to fear, which is sin. And the wages of sin is death. First internally and then externally. And then what's left of your soul will then find out the hard way that what you thought was so damn important here in the temporal finite world was only false evidence appearing real. And you accepted the counterfeit of everything that you really could have wanted that was true. But you wanted the counterfeit. You lived for your shadow. They don't call it the valley of the shadow of death for nothing. You're welcome to walk out of the prison. If you've gotten this far, you will. If you've gotten this far in this little talk, you will. It's because you actually care about truth. If not, you probably, you wouldn't have made it this far to begin with. You would not have even bothered to even listen to it. But those of you that are still with me, consider the things I'm telling you and go test them out. Look around you. Look in the mirror. Look at your own life. You know in your heart what I'm saying is true. And how do I know these things? I'm no different than you. I'm telling you from experience. Prison doors open. You have to walk out yourself. No one can do that for you. And if you think that you can't do that, ask God to do it for you. Because I'll tell you what, it is a lot better for you. The world, the things that you will be able to see and understand and do, far outweigh anything the shadow of those things can give you. Consider these words.